Good morning. Snuck up on some folks there with that good morning. Yes, good morning and welcome. I'm the Reverend William Levwood. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the minister here at Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church. We open and welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land, who live on and their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomic Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together shall one day know full justice. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our chalice lighting. That song, by the way, is composed by Isai Barnwell, who is not only a member of the vocal group Sweet Honey in the Rock, but is a Unitarian Universalist. So I just wanted to share that. So we're going to light our chalice now, and we're going to say some of the words from our mission statement together, and they're going to be on the screen for you as well. Please join me. Together we pledge to care and community. Together we pledge to grow in spirit. Together we pledge to act for justice.
Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Christina Watts, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am happy to be your worship associate today. This congregation is a welcoming and inclusive spiritual home where we inspire each other to live our values. Together, we care in community, grow in spirit, and act for justice. If you aren't new to Accotink, look around. Do you see people that you haven't met before or spoken to in a while? These people like you and want to meet you. Help us live up to our mission to be a welcoming and inclusive spiritual home for all by reaching out and making a connection. By visiting this congregation, newcomers are in a transition period, and people in transitions are more open to new friendships. This means that your new best friend might be here this morning, and this is your chance to get to them before someone else does. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour online and in person immediately after the service. We're so delighted that you decided to join us today. Welcome.
So we've got a lot of layers of things that we're exploring this month. We're exploring the theme of resistance from our Soul Matters monthly theme. We're having our pledge drive, and as part of that, we're exploring different parts of our mission statement, our new mission statement, each Sunday. We did that 2 Sundays ago. We looked at care and community on Orthodox Easter, since I had COVID on Easter, or Western Easter. And then we looked at acting for justice, particularly around the earth with our Earth Day service last Sunday. Wonderful multi-generational service planned by and implemented, put on by our Green Sanctuary team. And now we're going to explore growing in spirit a little bit this Sunday. And for those of you who may have thought, I can't believe our Unitarian Universalist minister made no mention of Passover right after Passover when we did that Orthodox Easter. That's because the COVID made this was going to be that Orthodox Easter Sunday right after Passover, and this Sunday, though not explicitly about Passover, is thematically connected to Passover because it's about what it means to be good ancestors together. And the holiday of Passover is a lot about remembering the liberation from enslavement and paying that forward into the future.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here this morning with you at Accotink. So when I was contemplating today's time for all ages and what it means to become a good ancestor together, my mind immediately went to the responsibility we each carry as humans to one another, to the earth, and to the creatures of the earth. The responsibility we have to see, to feel, to appreciate, and speak for all the voices who cannot speak for themselves. So I chose a book that is inspired by the many indigenous-led movements across North America. It's a bold and lyrical picture book that issues an urgent rallying cry to safeguard the earth's water from harm and corruption. Water is the first medicine. It affects and connects us all. We are water protectors, written by Carol Lindstrom and illustrated by Michaela Goad. Water is the first medicine, Nokomis told me. We come from water. It nourished us inside our mother's body, as it nourishes us here on Mother Earth. Water is sacred, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. My people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land, spoil the water, poison plants and animals, wreck everything in its path. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold that it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together to stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The winged ones, the crawling ones, the four-legged, the two-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, lakes, the earth. We are all related. Tears like waterfalls stream down, tracks down my face, tracks down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Nokomis told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. We are stewards of the earth. Our spirits have not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight of its life. So let this story be a reminder to each one of us of the incredible gift we have been given, our responsibility to protect those who cannot speak for themselves and become good ancestors together. I'd like to end with a quote by Samantha Sweetwater. A good ancestor works collaboratively with all that wishes humans well to bring health, happiness, peace, and abundance to all beings. We work for not just human beings, but the more than human animals, plants, and forces of nature that co-inhabit this earth. Thank you.
Our reading today is called A Timbered Choir by Wendell Berry. And this is a poem that's words are actually found in one of the songs in the hymnal. It's an important poem. It's very beautiful, and there's a lot to unpack. And Rev Lev is going to help unpack some of the words in his sermon. But as I read it, I would like you to just listen for that one line or phrase that really resonates with you. So I invite you to listen and find that one special line for you. It's called A Timbered Choir by Wendell Berry. Slowly, slowly they return to the small woodland let alone, great trees, outspreading and upright, apostles of the living light. Patient as stars, they build an air, tier after tier, a timbered choir, stout beams upholding weightless grace, of song a blessing on this place. They stand in waiting all around, uprisings of their native ground, downcomings of the distant light. They are the advent as they await. Receiving sun and giving shade, their life's a benefaction made, and is a benediction said over the living and the dead. In fall, their brightened leaves released, fly down the wind, and we are pleased to walk on radiance amazed. O light, come down to earth, be praised.
They are the advent they await. That's a line that stood out to me as I listened, probably because I want to talk with you today about what it means to be good ancestors together. And that line kind of sums it up. They are the advent they await. But I want to begin by addressing the question of what we mean by ancestors. So I think that we definitely mean biological ancestors, right? When I hear that word ancestors, I think of my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I'm named after my great-grandfather on my maternal side. But I also think that ancestors is a broader category than that. For example, if I were to say that we as Unitarian Universalists, or even you in your own life, are carrying on the traditions of our religious ancestors, right? You're not thinking of your biological ancestors. You're thinking of an affinity group of people who share our values, our practices, this living tradition that we're a part of. So I think this is particularly important to remember, both in terms of looking to the past at what we mean by ancestors, and when we are looking in the present towards being good ancestors together for the future. We're not only talking, I'm not endeavoring to be a good ancestor just for my biological child, right? Or if you don't have biological children, it doesn't mean you're not participating in this process of becoming or being a good ancestor for the future. Because the collective ancestors is really, when we talk about, it's actually more clear to me in the future when we say being good ancestors, then the image is not only of my child, the image is of a collective community that I am living my life in service to. So that's also true in the past. The other way that that's particularly important is when we think about injustice in the past, particularly if it's been there's a particular group that has caused that injustice, right? So when we think about the injustice of enslavement of African Americans in this country, the stealing of land and the genocide of the indigenous Americans here, and our responsibility to heal and bring justice today and into the future, I sometimes hear people say, well, my ancestors didn't own slaves. My ancestors didn't immigrate. For example, my German and French Canadian ancestors didn't immigrate until the 1880s, 1890s. Right? So people will say, so why am I responsible for these things that happened in the past? But we're responsible for these things that happened in the past as a collective, right? And if I'm, for example, a European American, a white person, I'm definitely still benefiting from the unearned privileges that come from those crimes, from that thievery of land, from the violence and terror, from the stealing of labor without compensation, right? So it's important that we think about ancestry in the past and in the future to include our biological kin, but also to go beyond that. So that being the case, what does it mean to be good ancestors together? So the short answer is to be the advent that we await. Or some of you have heard me talk about being or making good soil for the future. That's important because sometimes there's limits to how we can change and transform our society and make it better. So at the minimum, we can work to create the good soil, the conditions that allow future generations to continue to be good ancestors to their descendants, right? So even if we can't make the utopia we dream about, we can still create, for example, we can nurture resilient communities like this one, dedicated, committed to collective liberation of all people. And we're paying that forward, and we're creating that resilient, fertile soil. So to take another step back from the question, we need to ask why and how we are called to be good ancestors. So according to psychologist and philosopher Joshua Green, he points out that evolution rewards not the survival of the fittest, actually. He contends that evolution supports the survival of the most collaborative and cooperative. When a human community is more cooperative, more likely even to join together to go to war, or to share food amongst each other, to share childbearing responsibilities amongst each other, to support each other when a person is sick or going through a difficult time. This more cooperative community is more likely to survive and thrive, and thus more likely to reproduce and continue in the future, thus creating human beings who are empathetic and altruistic, generous and caring for each other. And it's also a process of creating good soil. So the experience of cooperation creates more cooperation, creates and sustains a habit of cooperation, such that a person in a cooperative community is more likely to support another person without first asking if that particular person will return the kindness. When an environment of cooperation is created, each person trusts that others in the community will support each other. Kind of like the PEBs, the digital pebbles example from 2 Sundays ago that I shared from science fiction writer Becky Chambers, where people give to one person without the expectation that they'll get reciprocity from that particular person in that moment, but with the expectation that they'll give back to the community and that will benefit the whole. Which creates that culture where supporting each other is seen as supporting the whole community, that weaves a network, an interdependent web of care and support, of generosity and gratitude, and of abundance and thriving. Also, a few months ago, we shared the story of Honi and the carob tree. This is a Jewish story from the Talmud, in which Honi comes upon a man who's planting a carob tree, which carob trees don't give fruit for 60 years after they're planted. So Honi says, why are you planting this tree? The man is also quite old. I forgot to mention that. You're not going to get to taste this fruit. You're not going to benefit from planting this seed. And the elder responds, there were carob trees when I arrived here. So I'm ensuring that there will be carob trees for the generations that come after. So I love that story. But we're really not just talking about planting one tree. Maybe in a place like Israel, you're planting a single tree, right? In a more arid climate. But we're really looking at planting forests. And I want to bring us back to that wisdom of forests that we explored a little bit last Sunday, that Suzanne Simard, her research, and others has lifted up. So I don't know if you all are aware that if forests, I was not aware of this until recently, if forests didn't pull moisture from the oceans, they didn't actively pull the moisture from the forest, there would only be a narrow band of land that's hospitable to human habitation on the edges of every continent, right? The rain, the precipitation, the moisture wouldn't be able to travel further inland, and you'd have arid lands except for in this narrow band on the edge of every continent. But luckily, fortunately for us, forests do pull moisture from the oceans in the form of rain, and that spreads forests and other vegetation across the continents into the centers of the continents far from the ocean. And I was thinking about how that happens, right? Because you're going to reach the edge of the forest at some point. And it made me think also, I mean, there's the wind, right, that sends the clouds a little bit further, but also you're creating the conducive climate for all kinds of vegetation. And there's what's called pioneer plants, like dandelions, for example, that I have on my ordination stole here. Dandelions are and other pioneer species they create the conditions for the next generation of plants that create the condition for the next generation that eventually becomes a forest. Does that make sense? Okay. You could think when we're doing social justice work, culturally transformative work, that we're being like those dandelions, right? That we're creating the conditions to extend beloved community from here, from this community, further out. But forests are not only creating the conditions for more forest, they're also metaphorically making good soil, and I do mean metaphorically for future forests, because they're not just creating literal soil for future forests, but the conditions by which forests thrive. So a forest creates the conditions for a forest to thrive. Does that make sense? They bring the rain, and then the forest collects and holds that moisture in the soil and in the atmosphere. It provides shade, which slows the evaporation by cooling the air so that more moisture remains in the forest. They put nutrients into the soil that's needed for trees and other vegetation to survive and thrive. They collaborate, as we talked about last week. They share that wood wide web, that fungal network that we created here in the sanctuary with yarn. Mother trees, although they block sunlight from smaller, younger trees, so you might think that they're in a relationship of competition and that the younger trees just have to be like, okay, I'm gonna get to grow big and like flourish and thrive when that mother tree dies and the leaves fall off and it finally falls over. But it turns out the mother trees are sharing sugars through that fungal network with those smaller trees who can't get the sugars, as much of the sugars, from sunlight because the mother tree is blocking it. And trees even share sugars with sick trees through that fungal network. Why is that? It's because all of this is to create the conditions where all of them will thrive, and they all thrive better when they're all together creating those conditions, that good soil, that metaphorical good soil that helps them all to thrive. Trees in a forest even do this amazing thing that when some trees, that when a pest starts eating a leaf on certain kinds of trees, the trees send enzymes to the leaf to make it more bitter, less palatable for the pest. And that would be enough, you would think, but they're actually communicating by scent. They send out a scent that gets carried to nearby trees that warns them that this pest is on the way. And those trees start making the enzymes to make the leaves bitter and unpalatable to the pests before the pests even get there. If they were competing with each other, you wouldn't want to do that. You want to be like, hey, no pests over here. But they're spreading that message. So in both human community and forest community, each person and each tree thrives and flourishes to the degree that the whole community thrives and flourishes. And Joshua Green says this understanding is the basis for human morality and ethics. Because with this understanding, we participate in cooperation as a community rather than, oh, I'll give you this if I know I'm going to get something back from you right away, immediately. Right now we have created a forest community of cooperation that we trust and we learn and we make a habit of being ethical and caring and empathetic and supporting each other. So, you might be wondering, what about the good ancestors part, the future part? I haven't been saying a lot about that. But being good ancestors together means that we transfer this care and community and this acting for justice that we do together, this growing in spirit, learning and growing together, that we spread our mission into the world like the dandelions, living our values in the wider world, and actually letting people know, I'm doing this because these are Unitarian Universalist values, and being a welcoming and inclusive spiritual home for a diversity of newcomers when they show up to join us, right? So we're spreading this foundation for being good ancestors. But the next part is to apply it to future generations. And this is a bit of a leap, which is why we need this foundation. Because beyond one generation, it's unlikely that the good things that we do in the present for future generations will benefit us in any way at all. I'm not going to be around here when the grandchildren are benefiting, or the great-grandchildren, or the great-great-grandchildren are benefiting. So why would I make sacrifices for their benefit? Now, there is a direct connection. It will benefit those we love, our children, and by extension, our children's children, or also our nibblings, which is an emerging gender-neutral term for nieces and nephews, and our nibblings. So if you're an aunt or an uncle, you also are benefiting your nibblings and your nibblings. We need a gender-neutral term for aunt and uncle, so get to work on that and let me know when you come up with it. So this is what we need to do, and I said it's a bit of a leap. So there's a practice that Ari Wallach, in his book Long Path, which has a really long subtitle, Becoming the Great Ancestors for Our Future Needs, an antidote for short-termism, which discusses how we can cultivate being these good, or he says, great ancestors. He gives a practice, and there's research that supports that if we meditate on empathy and gratitude for our ancestors, like you did earlier in the service, for the gifts that they have given us that allow us to thrive and flourish with dignity now, and also meditate with empathy and gratitude on ourselves in the present, that these two practices connect past to present to future. So it creates that image of a chain of being, of that interdependent web in time. And then we're more likely to be generous and supportive and caring and make sacrifices for the benefit of future generations. But as our wonderful Time for All Ages offering this morning, water protectors, by the way, I don't know what they're doing right now, but there is a pledge to be a water protector at the end of that book. So I wonder if they're making that pledge. Or parents, if they're not, you could offer that to them as something that they could do, is make that pledge. So it's not, as that book makes clear, it's not just about our human community. So this brings us back also to that image of the forest. But philosopher Joshua Green also proposes that all life exists and evolves through cooperation. So not only does life, the very existence of complex life is a result of cooperation. Single cells organism joining with other cells and then in cooperation with other cells to form ever more complex forms of interdependent life, which creates, this collective web creates and sustains the conditions for the flourishing of life in the present and in the future. Just like the forest doesn't just create and sustain the conditions for the flourishing of forest, but creates and sustains the conditions for human flourishing. Remember, we wouldn't even have rich, fertile lands in the center of our continents without forests. And they do this for other animals as well, obviously. This continues on and on. So this means that being good ancestors together is about creating and sustaining equitable human communities where every person flourishes with dignity, and creating and sustaining the conditions for the flourishing of a diversity of life, an interdependent web engaged in relationships of mutuality, reciprocity, respect, and care. This is what it means to be good ancestors together. As I often say, may it be so, and we be among those who make it so. I'm going to close today by reading again the poem from Wendell Berry. Now that I've shared all this about being good ancestors, listen to these words and images again. Oh, slowly, slowly they return to the small woodland let alone, great trees outspreading and upright, apostles of the living light. Patient as stars, they build in air, tier after tier, a timbered choir, stout beams upholding weightless grace of song, a blessing on this place. They stand in waiting all around, uprisings of their native ground, downcomings of the distant light. They are the advent they await. Receiving sun and giving shade, their life's a benefaction made, and is a benediction said over the living and the dead. In fall, their brightened leaves released, fly down the wind, and we are pleased to walk on radiance, amazed. O light, come down to earth, be praised. May we be together that timbered choir for our ancestors.
As we extinguish our chalice, I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with the words of David Bumbow. And you can join hands if you want to, or not, as you're comfortable. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one, that binds us forever together in spite of time and death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.